Let me give you a couple of stats that'll I think kind of illustrate what I'm talking about. 64% of Americans hate their jobs. They hate them. 74%, 75%, somewhere in that range, would forego a raise to see their boss fired. This is a real indictment of management in this country. Management was supposed to solve a lot of our problems, supposed to solve a lot of efficiency issues and those sorts of things. And it hasn't. In fact, it's had the opposite effect. It has literally reduced productivity because people just don't like their managers. In fact, 66% of Americans would prefer a robot for a boss. Now, there's an interesting caveat to that. They want a robot for the boss who enforces the rules because they know that'll be more fair than any human being, and they can count on that. They want a human being for the personal things, for the psychological things, where I am.
Welcome to Winning Strategies Playbook, the podcast where we welcome business leaders, CEOs, and industry experts to discuss the rise to the top, building wealth, and real estate insights. Here's your host, Jeremy Spann.
So, welcome to Winning Strategies Playbook. And for more information on this podcast or video, go to myexperiencedrealtor.com. We don't put a lot of stuff on there, so that way it makes it easy for people to navigate the website, find out information on this episode and more information on our guest. And so today we have Michael Sherrod. Welcome, Michael. Thanks for coming.
Oh, I'm glad to be here.
Man, fellow TCU.
Yeah, right.
I got the TCU purple on to support it.
My favorite shirt, yeah.
So my father-in-law says I have to open up every one of these with a joke.
Okay.
And so you being in business, I thought you would appreciate this one. How many marketers does it take to change a light bulb?
I can't even imagine.
None. They've automated it.
I like that one a lot. That's right down my strike zone. That's fantastic.
Well, my father-in-law really expected these, knowing me, that they were going to be a lot more animated, and he loves getting acknowledged on every podcast, but is inherently disappointed by my jokes every single time.
Well,
so,
he should provide them.
That's what I'm fearful of. He's an engineer, so none of us would probably understand him anyway.
You don't want that. Not funny.
So you are currently a professor at TCU, and tell us about that.
Yeah, I'm the William M. Dickey Entrepreneur in Residence.
Okay.
And, I just feel so fortunate to have that position. It's an absolutely fantastic job to watch students evolve over time. I get to teach undergrads and graduate students, and so I get a really good look at what young people are thinking about right now, the kinds of things that they want to create. They want to make the world a better place. And then graduate students, you get to see they've been out there for a while and they're coming back, and now they have a real clear indication from what they want to do, where they want to go. And they have a much more directed attitude, where the undergrads are kind of, amorphous when they first arrive. So it's just fascinating. And the great thing about it is, one of the things I told them is I want to keep being an entrepreneur, because you can't really be effective as an entrepreneur if you're not doing it currently. Things move way too fast. And they agreed to that. So it's awesome. I love it.
That's great. So you know a thing or two about being an entrepreneur, don't you?
I do. I've been doing that for a long time.
Tell us about that. How did your journey as an entrepreneur begin? When and where did that begin?
Well, this is something I tell my students. Don't worry if when you're a senior in college you don't know what you want to do, because I sure didn't. My whole life I'd had people telling me what they thought I should do. That I should be in politics, or that I should be a doctor, or that I should be a priest, or whatever it might be. And, I sort of just slid by and let that all go, and, was just kind of not sure. And I thought, well, one of these things will happen. But then suddenly I was a senior and I was about to graduate, and I had not a clue. I knew I didn't want to be a lawyer. I knew I didn't want to be a doctor. My father was a doctor, and I watched him work all the time. He was a solo practitioner, so that's, all hours of the day and night. And I certainly did not want to be a politician, which a lot of people thought I should do. I'm a massive introvert, and I had to teach myself over the years to act like an extrovert. So what happened is I finally sat down in the last months of my senior year and said, what do I want to do? And I basically came up with, I don't want to do the same thing every day. I don't want every year of my life to be the same year over and over. I want it to be very different. I want it to be full of different kinds of experiences and different kinds of people. And I wanted to really experience as much of the world as possible. So I thought, well, my sister was a journalist, and I thought, she's having fun. One day she's flying with the Blue Angels, and the next day she's at a fashion show in New York. This sounds kind of fun. So I went to the University of Texas at Austin over the summer and took some journalism courses. And I got hooked, not on journalism, because I was an okay writer, but I wasn't anywhere, I wasn't big talent or anything. But what I discovered is that I absolutely loved the whole idea of publishing. And So I immediately applied to the University of Missouri at Columbia journalism program, a master's degree, and I got in. And there I learned a lot more about journalism and publishing. And so when I graduated from there, I had a choice. I had a really good job offer, and I had the opportunity to go start something. So I thought, I'm going to go start my own. Because while I'm not an artist myself, I do love working with creative people. So back then, before a lot of this computerization, you had to work with artists and photographers and topographers and designers and all these great people who could help you put together a magazine or a newspaper. And I had an opportunity to start a magazine. So I did. I had enough money for one issue. And if I didn't make money on enough money to do the second one, I was essentially bankrupt. So my wife was so generous and said, absolutely, you go give it a shot. So I was very, very lucky. I happened to land in a marketplace that only had a daily newspaper and no other media. And they had a lot of wealthy people there who were the backbone of the community and who really didn't have anything about them going on. So I started sort of a small version of Town and Country magazine. It was all about the wealthy people in town, the doctors, the lawyers, the company owners, the people who were the constant residents of that community. And I just talked about their role in the community and their kids and their trips and their parties. And we took pictures and all that sort of thing. And it just took off. By the fourth issue, it was 200 pages and 65% advertising.
Wow.
Yeah. I mean, it was just nuts. Everyone just was like, yes, we want this. And so that was great. I was suddenly making more money than I ever thought I would make. And I wasn't really in it to make money. I just wanted to do it because to me, as a publisher, I had an opportunity to meet anybody. I could call them up and say, hey, I want to do a story about you. And they would always say yes. And then I could bring people together that I thought should meet each other. So I'd have these dinners and people would come together, and lifelong friendships were forged at some of those dinners with people who never would have met if we hadn't been able to sit down and have a conversation, talk about things. And I absolutely loved it. And so out of that, I started a graphics company and then an advertising agency that had offices in Houston and Midland. And then I started another magazine and then a weekly newspaper. So it just kept growing. And everything was going great. We were just crushing it. And I was driving home to have lunch with my wife and our new baby. And I got hit by a truck. And I mean, this guy ran a stop sign and hit me right on the driver's side door, and it knocked me into an oncoming car. And fortunately for me, it destroyed my seatbelt mechanism. So I went out my windshield, through their windshield, and out the back window.
Wow.
Yeah, and I was in bad shape. My whole left side was pretty much crushed. So I was in the hospital a long time, and I couldn't run my company being in the hospital, and I had a head injury. So I was just not able to really think. So I had an opportunity to sell the company while I was in the hospital, and I did. And I thought I was going to run that company for the rest of my life. I had big plans for that. I was going to, by today, if my plans had been come to fruition, I'd be a billionaire. I'd own hundreds and hundreds of publications around the world and websites and everything else. So, it was a huge blow, and it took me a really long time to get over it. But when I did, that's when I started creating more companies. But it took years before I was able to do that again.
Wow. So the name of this podcast is Winning Strategies Playbook. And our target audience is high performers and intellectuals. And it's actually evolved into, or what I like to think of it as involved into the younger millennial or even generation after them, my daughter's generation, for what I call the everybody got a trophy generation, because when everybody went to getting trophies, no one taught people what to do when life happens or when you fail at something, or just like your situation going through 3 windows and 2 of them were somebody else's vehicle. You thought one thing, and now here is a not just a change moment. This is a life-altering moment, right?
Yep.
And that no one who, in my opinion, is incredibly successful. Of course, there's always that 1 or 2 off situation, standard deviation that anything can happen. My dad says, "Never say never," but didn't get there by batting 1,000. Mm-hmm. Whether it was your choice or not, something you had in control or something you didn't have in control. And one of the things that I want to go back to is when you chose this area, was there any, because I always make the joke of I've had a restaurant for 10 years and knew nothing about the restaurant. And people go, "Wow, man, you must be really good at running restaurants." I said, "It is better to be lucky than smart." And I was lucky many, many times because I had no idea what I was doing.
Yeah.
Was this a situation when you saw that there was no other media publications? How much of this, in your opinion, was you saw the opportunity, and how much of it was, hey, this looks like a good one, and it turned out to be luck, or a combination of the two?
Well, I will absolutely tell you it was luck initially. I knew what I wanted to do. I had my direction, but I really didn't know how to do it. I had the theory, but I had no practice. So starting this thing from scratch, I did everything at first. I took the pictures. I wrote the copy. I actually pasted it up. I typeset it. I did everything except print it. Everything. And it was hard 24/7 sometimes, where you were just, having to put it together at night and then go sell ads during the day. I did the whole thing. I will say this, one of the most transcendent moments I've ever had in my life was when I realized I had just sold the ad that was going to make it possible for me to do the second issue. And when I knew that I had absolutely made it for that first issue, and that was huge. I'll never forget what that felt like. Second only to seeing my first child born and my second child born. Both of those were, wow, that was just unbelievable. I know people say that a lot, but it's true.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's just out there. So to get back to answering your question, it was total luck. Seriously. I just happened to stumble into a marketplace where I thought they needed something, and they did, and it turned out to be they really wanted it. I don't think they knew they wanted it until they saw it. And then they were like, yeah, this is fun. This is something else we have now that we can. And remember, there was no internet. There were no phones. Print magazines were entertainment as much as they were anything else. And it connected the community in a really, I think, interesting way that they hadn't been connected before. It allowed them to see what everyone was doing. It was sort of like a Facebook on paper.
Right.
They could keep up with each other through the magazine.
And the way to unfriend them was just throw it in trash.
Yeah, that's right. Just put it on the table and never look at it.
Like a delete button.
Yeah, that's right. Exactly. Yeah, it had a very easy on off. You just open it or you close it. Done.
Man, I tell you, and this is again an opinion. and I want to get your thoughts on this, is successful entrepreneurs, I think, there's a number of elements that go into it, right? And I talk a lot with folks about there's something in your DNA, right? Because there's that entrepreneur spirit and then that entrepreneur courage. And everybody wants to be an entrepreneur, but the courage to go into it knowing that things of, well, we got enough money to do one and then grow it to this incredible thing. And then all of a sudden, massive car accident, right? But this DNA of entrepreneurs is almost like a foreign language in our head that even we don't know how to translate, but it's communicating something of there's an opportunity there. We feel it, right? We know it and we call it luck, because we picked right, because sometimes we think it's there and we pick wrong. Been down that road heavily.
We all have.
Right. Man, there is nothing worse in this world than looking at your wife and saying, hey, by the way, I not only lost all of our money, but we're holding the bag for $4 million, by the way.
Yeah.
And
that's a tough conversation.
And I tell you, the marriage I have to my wife, the partnership I have with my wife, I picked right. If there was one thing I did in my life that I did right, was picked her, because in that moment I told her, I said, I would have left me.
Oh yeah.
I was making decisions without her permission and not communicating things, not because I was intentionally trying to be deceptive. It's just, that's the way I'm driven, is I start a race before a gun goes off. So I wasn't even thinking about anything else that when it got there. And it's just really interesting how sometimes that does happen. But there's just times though where I've seen opportunities and it's like, man, I can't explain it, but I know this is where this needs to go. And it just was like, let's go bang or bust, right? And so one of those incidents was in 2011. I'd gotten in the restaurant business. Didn't know anything about the restaurant business. And without making sausage out of all the brain damage that went up to leading into July 1st of 2011. And I was doing everything I could to just keep the doors open. I was working overtime. The paychecks I would get were going straight to keeping the doors open, right? Anything we could do. And I walked in, and my general manager at the time was there. Nobody else was there, just him. I was like, where's everybody else? And he goes, I sent him home. And I was like, well, who's running the bar? And he goes, me. I said, well, who's running the kitchen? He goes, me. And I was like, man, slow night, huh? And he goes, huh. And I was like, so this is the only guy in here. How much business have we done today? And he goes, no, that's it.
Good.
And he goes, oh, but there's more. We have enough money to make it to next week. That's it.
Yep.
And not only were because I had two other Marine Corps buddies that were also investors in this. And I was like, what do you mean we only got enough money to keep the doors open the next week? And he goes, that's it, man. And I looked at him and I said, okay, here's what we're going to do. On Saturday, we're going to have a grand opening. He goes, all right. He goes, look, I know you're like the world's worst communicator and listener, but you didn't hear what I just said is we only have enough money to get us to next week. And I says, well, what I heard is we have enough money to buy everything we can, as much booze and as much product to make as many pizzas and to sell as many beers as we can. And he goes, yeah. And I said, well, we're either going to have a grand opening that was the one good day that we had, or it'll go bust.
Yep.
And I called in every favor there was. Anybody that was on my Facebook, it was in my phone, and I said, I'm having a grand opening, and I just need you to support me and show up. And then we lined up anybody I knew that could play an instrument. We had bands going from 11 a.m. to 11 p.m. that night. To this day, was still the highest record sales day we had. But what it did is it caught the attention of other surrounding things. And here it is. This June will be 10 years.
Wow. Congratulations.
No, don't get me wrong. There was a slew of things where I really got a lot of lucky that happened like immediately right after that. I mean, it was like one step forward, 10 steps back. And, but there was just something about it that I was just like, I'm willing to take the gamble. I'm willing to take that risk. I'm willing to do that entrepreneur courage to just go forth and just say, let's just see what happens.
That's a great story because it brings up something that yeah, courage is part of it, but managing fear is even a bigger part of it. You're really, what you're doing when you're starting something or when you're taking a risk, you're managing that fear that comes up in every single person's head of, what if people think I'm an idiot? What if I look foolish? Will people think I'm a failure? How can I risk all of this social approbation I might get if I do fail? Am I willing to do that? So managing that fear and channeling it like you did into a successful grand opening, even though you'd been open for a long time, that was great. You reintroduced the company to all of these people who needed to know it existed. And that was a great move, brilliant move. But you said something else that's really important. Entrepreneurs get a lot of kudos and praise, especially when they're successful, but their wives don't, or their husbands don't. And those are the people that are right there making it possible for us to take these risks. And like you said, my wife, I think she should probably be sainted. She stuck with me through that accident. She was always willing to say, you bet, you go for it. You do what you want to do. I wouldn't be here without her. Literally, I would not be here without her. And they're the unsung heroes of entrepreneurs, I think, in a lot of ways.
Man, you're so on point with that, because in August of 2016, sitting in my almost $1 million house at the kitchen counter, looking at a $300 electric bill, wondering how I was going to pay that. And instead of my wife coming in, I'd let everybody down. I'd let my daughter down. I'd let my in-law. I had let everybody down. I'd let investors who were also classmates from my executive MBA program that you and I are alumni of. And I was just sitting there going, I pooched the screw on this one, right? And I was like, what do I do? So I looked at my wife and I said, man, this one's a tough one to swallow. And she looked at me and said, we should be business partners. Huh? Normally you accuse me of not listening. Did you not just hear how bad this situation is? And her trust and love, because she believed in me. Mm-hmm. If I could ever, because she's an extreme introvert, I'd make a joke that even though we're business partners, she could be friends with a cactus and a rock and be totally okay with it, right?
I get that. I understand that.
She just said, look, I don't know why your mind works the way it does. She goes, but I know your heart is always pure. She says, but going forward, she goes, if we're going to do this as business partners, I just need you to do one thing. Just slow down enough to communicate with me. In this time, ask questions. Because that's what I was making assumptions and going and not asking questions. And I wasn't doing it on purpose, but it was just that drive that I just felt I had to go. And so now, 4 years later, we're doing quite well. And what's really funny is I don't think the audience always understands that is, we're in November, so this would have been 51 months ago. I not only lost all my money, but I was holding the bag for $4 million that I couldn't pay a bill on.
That's tough circumstances.
51 months later, that all got cleared up. Everybody got paid. Everybody got their part. There's still some investors within that company that definitely are still dealing with all of that. But now I got to be in a place where I get to pay cash for my kid to go to college, which I realize that it'll be a decade from now how much he really appreciates that, considering I dropped out of high school and went in the Marines and then learned I shouldn't have dropped out of high school. I should have just gone straight to college. But these little components in it is, it was that trust of just, man, but I knew this. If there was anything I learned about myself through this process after being in the Marine Corps for 6 years and being a police officer for 16 years was I was really unemployable.
Well, sometimes entrepreneurs are created out of necessity. No one else will have them, so they got to figure it out.
I just can't imagine what it would be like to go. I actually had a friend it was earlier this week, a pretty high level company said, how much would it take for you to come? And I went, you can't afford it, dude. I was like, I am not, that number would have to be so incredibly large in order to feel like I was being handcuffed. That to me, that number is not a check you're willing to write.
Yeah, and it probably wouldn't work out anyway because you'd be unhappy. Money is not a antidote for unhappiness.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, studies show that the prime number for where people are most happy is about $76,000, where they can a year, where they can enjoy their life, they can have a vacation, they can have a couple of cars, they can do the things they want, they can educate their kids, and beyond that, the amount of money you make doesn't really make much difference to your happiness. Now, it does to your levels of security and your feelings of worth and all those kinds of things, but really right in that range, maybe a little higher now because of these things are getting more expensive all the time. It's not a huge number, and when you think about that number, most people in this country on average, if you're middle class, make about $52,000 or $53,000, and that hasn't changed much. And so there's a lot of pressure on the middle class, but still, that amount of money is still where people feel pretty darn happy. And a lot of it, I think, has to do with they're committed to their work in a way, but at the same time, it gives them time to be with their families and create relationships, which are what makes people happy. People don't talk about how great their business decisions were when they're on their deathbed. They talk about their relationships, and they wish they had had better ones and more. So I think that's part of that reason. If all you do is work, you don't have time for those things, and you really miss out on the most important and valuable things that are out there. So let me give you a couple of stats that'll I think kind of illustrate what I'm talking about. 64% of Americans hate their jobs. They hate them. 74%, 75%, somewhere in that range, would forego a raise to see their boss fired. This is a real indictment of management in this country. Management was supposed to solve a lot of our problems, supposed to solve a lot of efficiency issues and those sorts of things, and it hasn't. In fact, it's had the opposite effect. It has literally reduced productivity because people just don't like their managers. In fact, 66% of Americans would prefer a robot for a boss. Now, there's an interesting caveat to that. They want a robot for the boss who enforces the rules because they know that'll be more fair than any human being, and they can count on that. They want a human being for the personal things, for the psychological things, where I have to be home with my child, or I have a sick child, or I need paternity leave, or whatever it might be. So these are things that are going on in the workforce that are having a real impact on people's happiness, if you will. Now, the other thing that's going on is that we have this thing called an entrepreneurial imperative that is coming for companies as well as individuals. So right now in the United States, the average lifespan of a corporation is about 14 years, and it's declining. In 1931, it was 71 years. And the reason for this decline in their ability to survive is because we are in constant transformation. Technology is constantly transforming. Companies are needing to move way faster than they're built for. Corporations are built to create a core competency and get better and better and more efficient at that every year. Make more money, less cost. And they have to have time to do that. And they don't have time to do that anymore because as soon as they get that core competency up and running, they get disrupted or something new comes along. And their consumers don't have a lot of brand loyalty anymore, so they move on to the next thing. So companies have to get really, really good at iterating really fast, and they are not built for that. So we're going through a transformation right now where companies are trying to figure out how do we move forward in a way that's more flexible and more adaptable and more resilient than what we have now so that we can actually stay in business. Well, one of the ways that they are doing that is they are beginning to have fewer and fewer full-time employees and more independent contractors because every consultancy in the world, Bain, McKinsey, you name it, is telling them, and has been for a long time, don't have so many full-time employees, have independent contractors. So what's happening on the other, so you can get big fast, and you can get small fast based on what's happening in the marketplace. So what's happening on the employee side, the entrepreneurial imperative for individuals is that the gig economy has arrived. As of this year, more than 50% of the entire American workforce is on 1099s. This is the first time this has ever happened. It was supposed to happen in 2025, but COVID obviously accelerated that trend dramatically with so many unemployed people. So now we have millions of people who are rushing to try to join DoorDash or Uber or Lyft or whatever so they can make some money to pay their bills. And it's just flooded these companies with applicants. And the people who were doing that to make their living are being displaced, or they're having a much harder time. So this 1099 thing is going to get bigger and bigger. And it cuts across all socioeconomic groups. Doctors are now working for hospitals on 1099s. Accountants are working on 1099s. You have part-time CFO, part-time CMO. So these are companies that hire really talented people who work for 4 or 5 corporations at a time doing part-time marketing work or technology work, whatever it may be. We're going to see a whole lot more of that, where companies start to spring up that do nothing but help talented people find multiple jobs. So they'll have a portfolio of jobs over time. Their benefits will go with the person. Companies won't want to do that. They don't want to do it now. It's a 30% overburden on your salary at a minimum. So this is going to cause a lot of change, and it's being forced by the turbulence we see in our institutional systems and in our economic systems. I ask my students every year, name me one institution, military, governmental, religious, secular, whatever, nonprofit, that you trust implicitly, that when they say something, you believe it. I get crickets. In fact, the only one answer I've ever gotten in 6 years of asking this question of undergrads and graduates alike, the library, public library. That's the one answer I've ever gotten that was close to somebody believing an institution. So this tells you a lot about this turbulence we're going through because we don't trust our institutions anymore. None of them. Whether they're religious or military or governmental, we don't trust them. And so what's happening, the United States is like a startup. We're the only, as you know from the book of Friedman's book, we're the only invented nation in the world. And that's fascinating. But we're like a startup and a corporation. We have to renew ourselves all the time. So that's what's happening. We're renewing ourselves. We have to renew our institutions to take us into the second half of the 21st century. We have to renew our economy to be able to deal with the second half of the 21st century. And we're trying to figure that out now, and it's going to be messy. It's going to be ugly. When I read the book you sent me, I was fascinated because a lot of the things he talks about are very similar to the things that I talk about when I give speeches about the future and that sort of thing. We have a little bit different point of view on it, but with these forces that are working right now, we have a really chaotic, turbulent time ahead of us. But this is also the single greatest moment in history for entrepreneurs. There is more value to be created now than ever before by solving some of these problems. And, I think climate change alone is maybe the greatest single entrepreneurial opportunity in the history of the world. I think it'll produce the first individual trillionaire on the planet sometime in the 21st century who comes up with a solution that is massively effective. And then you look at all the other problems we have around, inequality and all of these things. We're going to start seeing new coalitions come together. We're going to see all kinds of fascinating stuff going on because of this turbulence. But that's how we're going to get. That's the same thing that happens in companies when they transform. And we're a combination of a company because the United States is all about business, no question about that. And we're a giant city in a way. Companies can't last very long because they don't collide. They don't have enough scale to constantly renew themselves, and they're not built for that. Cities, on the other hand, can last 1,000 years or more because they're constantly renewing themselves. And that's what our economy is doing now, I think. And our whole system of government is renewing itself.
So that's very, very interesting. So the book you're talking about, The Storm Before the Calm by George Friedman. And I've been a big George Friedman fan for a long time. When I get up at 4 a.m, I have a slew of things that I read, and George Friedman's is one of them, and trying to always keep informed. And in the book, it talks about 2 cycles that this country has a history of going through, which is every 50 years, a socioeconomic cycle where we're currently leaving the 5th cycle, entering the 6th cycle. And every 80 years, we have an institutional cycle where we are, the reason things seem probably very turbulent is in the history of the U.S., both of these cycles haven't happened at the same time. So things seemed a lot louder than what they normally would be by the federal government trying to understand its relationships with the states and what it can or cannot do and whether it will take more power or lose more power. And I think that right now is probably one of the most interesting times in history because we've had technology for quite some time, but we've had antiquated thought that has maybe prevented that technology from evolving. So what happens is turbulence like you're talking about, right? Where only so much turbulence can happen until someone creates a widget that says, let's be done with this so we can move on to whatever the next set of problems is going to be. And if I heard you correct, and please correct me, is the United States acting like a lot like a startup and reinventing itself or learning to deal with things that have changed or are occurring right now? Is that?
Well, I think a couple of things about that. I think Friedman's point of view, he simplified it for the book. I mean, there are a lot of other forces at work here,
Right.
Technology being one of the greatest. We don't know where the next disruption is going to come from. We are no longer the technological giant. We have a lot of competition in that. China, Israel, Europe are all fascinating technological factories themselves. We're gonna see a lot more technology coming from other parts of the world, impinging on our hegemony in that area. So this is going to be fascinating, and I think one of our biggest issues is the technology and the problems have outpaced our ability to create policy, and this is an area where when I talk to economic groups about what's going to happen, one of the things that I tell them, I don't know the time frame of this, but I believe that COVID probably has accelerated it a little bit. But we've been experiencing a federal government that's pretty much deadlocked for quite a while. And I think what's going to happen is already happening, and you can see it in a number of things around COVID, for instance, is a lot of power is going to devolve from Washington to cities and regions. The state is in pretty much the state government's in pretty much the same situation as the federal government. The only place where there's real nonpartisanship is in cities, where you have to get the work done. You have to clean the water, you have to fix the roads, you have to pick up the trash, and it doesn't matter if you're a Democrat, Independent, or Republican, your neighbors know you, and they know where to go to find you to complain. So you can't have this, this buffer between you and your constituency. And every mayor of Fort Worth in recent history has done the job really well, regardless of where they came from, because they know this and they're connected to the community. So being the only place where stuff actually gets done, we're going to start seeing a lot more investment in startups and small business coming from regions and communities rather than Silicon Valley or New York. It's going to become much more of a city regional economic factor because that's where jobs are. You can bring in big companies, but big companies over time are net job destroyers. They're not net job creators. Small companies do that because big companies only last for a while. And yes, they do create jobs while they're growing, but then they start to get small again. And they're going to stop creating full-time jobs. They're going to create more 1099 jobs. Where the full-time jobs are going to be is with entrepreneurs. So this is where cities, I think, should really be taking another look at how do we invest in our entrepreneurial and small business communities, because that's where we're going to build stability. That's where we're going to get this constant increase of people, hiring people. And that's the point of entrepreneurship. It's not to build a company and flip it. It's to create good jobs so people can buy a house, buy a car. Our whole society is built on consumerism. 70% of our economy depends on people buying stuff. If we're not creating the kinds of jobs that let people do that, we're kidding ourselves that we're going to have a robust economy for anyone other than the super wealthy. And we can't do that. America's not built that way. It's like a company that has a core competency. We're blowing that core competency if we don't keep a good middle class and provide the tools for people to actually rise up out of wherever they are to join that middle class or go beyond it. So I think that's what we're going to be seeing in this coming out of this turbulence. We're going to see going back to that. We're going to be going back to building opportunities into the general life or environment, and that's going to come from cities and regions. And the more economic power they have, the more powerful they're going to be. So you're going to see Fort Worth and Dallas and Denton and Waco and Weatherford and all of the North Texas cities up there start to bind together and start to solve some of these issues on their own. And with COVID, you saw states start to create consortiums where they could source PPE and face masks and other kinds and vaccines or whatever. California created I think 8 states, and New York created a consortium of 15. In the Midwest, there are 7 or 8 that came together to do this. You're going to see a lot more of that, and you're going to see cities doing the same thing and getting way more involved in making sure they have food security, making sure they have healthcare security, making sure that they have economic security, and they're more prepared, because they can't depend on the federal government anymore to come in and create that umbrella of protection that we always used to have. So they're going to have to figure out how to do it themselves. And as that happens, I think we'll see a lot more investment going into building the infrastructure, not just for the country, but for these regions.
Man, so that is fascinating. And as I'm hearing you say this, I think of just a minor example of, so I split my time between here and my house in Colorado and Pagosa Springs. And mainly reason is I when I'm here, I'm pulled 7 ways to Sunday, right? I mean, it's just constant business generation, but it's louder here. So when I'm working on the business then I'm here, or I always get it confused. Is it on the business or in the business? Point me in is, so after I'm back here for a couple of weeks, I'm up there working on it. So I don't work any less hours while I'm up there. And I mean, it was really funny is I had to stop posting pictures when I was up there because people just thought I was on permanent vacation. I was like, no, the difference is I don't look at my street. I look at a mountain. But one of the reasons I go up there too is because it's healthier, is because, funny enough, with technology in Pagosa Springs, the internet sucks. It is so bad that I have 2 internets because I pay for 2 internets, because when one goes down, the other one goes up. And then when that one goes down, the other one goes up. But historically what happens is by about 1 or 2 o'clock in the afternoon, it's so everybody, which is not a lot of people there that are using it, that it's just so slow. I can't get anything done. So I go out and exercise, hiking through the mountains and doing the things that actually inherently make me happy, that now I have the avenues to go do. Mm-hmm. And I can tell, because when I'm back here, even though I have it on my schedule, don't forget to work out, I never work out, because it's just one disruption after another is happening each day where I have to respond to, instead of just being like, well, I'll get to that one in a week. But as you were talking through this, one of the reasons we picked Pagosa Springs is because Durango Airport's only about 45 minutes from my house. So I could be back here 3 different times of the day if I need to be for clients. But COVID locked down the airports and there was only like 1 flight. Now they're getting back up there. So the path became driving back and forth a lot more than I anticipated. But you're absolutely right, is how different cities are, and even how different they were responding to the pandemic.
Yep.
So when generally leave really early and leave Fort Worth, I get to Clarendon, which is about 45 minutes outside of Amarillo. And there's this little place called the Clarendon Outpost. And it is just the funniest, interesting story. If you're ever on 287, you have to stop in there. It is a pharmacy. It is a restaurant. It is a gas station. It is a gift shop, I would say, a junk shop. I would say, like, you know, and it's funny because there's not a lot before or after that. So the local DPS troopers are in there always eating breakfast, lunch, or dinner, or what have you. And nobody's wearing masks there, right? And then we usually stop there. So 45 minutes later, I naturally have to eat and got to take a little restroom break. So we usually stop right about Amarillo, which is much different. And then we usually top off with gas and make a little restroom break. And then our next stop is usually Santa Fe, which is completely different.
Mm-hmm.
And then from Santa Fe to Pagosa is about 3 hours of you're just driving through nothing. And Pagosa is completely different. And it was just interesting to hear you say this and think about from Fort Worth to Clarendon to Amarillo to Santa Fe to Pagosa. I mean, you're only talking about a 12-hour distance. And these are very different shapes of cities and personalities
Mm-hmm.
through them all. And it's because when it comes down to it is this, the community has to come together to survive, right? And you can't expect for the, you know, knight in shining armor to come thousands and thousands of miles away and they get together and they figure it out.
That's right.
And now with technology, having the access to it is really not even this device is going to become outdated what it is now because they're getting ready to come out with iPhone 12, right?
Yeah.
So the device itself is changing, but it's having the access to the internet highway, which drives the ability for these devices to do this stuff. And we're seeing this in real estate where your tertiary markets are starting to explode for a couple of reasons. One, if I only have to make, you know, I needed to live closer earlier because I was driving that drive 5 days a week. But now I may not even have to make that drive or it's only once or twice a week. I'm okay with living an hour and a half away to make that drive. And that's putting pressure on some of these smaller cities where some welcome the growth and some are pretty resistant to it. But also we were running out of places to build.
Mm-hmm.
You know, Fort Worth, I've got one of my clients that just says, within this geographical area, if you can find me 100 acres, I will literally pay whatever they want because I have nowhere else to build right now.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, well, not only is there nothing for sale, but man, I'm Google searching and searching. I'm not even sure there's that much dirt within that geographical area for you to be able to do that. So the expansion of being able to work in Itasca or live in Itasca, Texas, which is right between here and Waco, right?
Right.
And your office is in downtown Fort Worth or even Dallas, right?
Well, you know, you're hitting on, you know, people don't want to be in dense areas. Density is a problem now.
Mm-hmm.
We used to love that density. We wanted to be downtown. We wanted to live close in because the density was awesome. The restaurants, the entertainment, all of that. Well, that has now become a liability. And so people are searching for less density. So they're moving to these small towns, or they're at least getting a place in the small towns if they can afford it. And you're right, that commute now maybe once a week, if that much. And so it's better for everybody. They have more land, they have more space, and they can be healthier. Now, what impact this will have long term, I don't know if that'll continue or not. But if I don't believe that this COVID is going to be a 100-year event. I think it's going to be a 20, 25-year event. We're going to see more of this. We're going to, what people don't realize is that a 1 month interruption in business occurs about every 3.7 years, and that's going to accelerate. You look back on things and you don't realize that there's been a lot of disruption of businesses over many years, but it's accelerating. So when you have that kind of, and it may not be nationwide, but you're going to have it happen with fires, you're going to have it happen with floods, you're going to have it happen with bad weather and excessive rain and all of these kinds of things. We're already seeing that. That's already happening. So business interruptions are just going to become part and parcel of our day to day. So having a set location could be a liability. You need a lot of flexibility. You need the ability to have people everywhere so you can continue to do business even when there's a flood or everything's burned down, but it hasn't burned down your ability to connect to the internet or to connect to your team who may be virtual all over the country. So this is business has suddenly realized, wow, you know what? This is kind of interesting because I thought I needed to actually see my employees every day, but they're actually being more productive out there on their own, which gives me more time to think the big thoughts and how we're going to manage all this. And wow, this is kind of cool because now I can bring people in to talk to my folks that can be anywhere in the world. I don't have to fly them in here. I don't have to work on some big scheduling thing. They might do it today. And the world's greatest expert might be willing to talk to your team because they're at home too. I mean, it's changing the way we think about business formation, about entrepreneurship. I tell my MBA class in Venture Ideas, in that class, they have to start a company and make money by the end of the semester. And I tell them, you know what? If we wanted to, we could start a company a week. It's that easy to do. It's not very expensive. With the internet, you can create little niche products and services that we could start one a week, and probably 60% of them would survive. And they look at me like I'm crazy. And then we start talking about it, and they realize it's just dead simple. You get a domain name, you put it up on the web, you create a one-page funnel, you put a $50 ad on Facebook, and you really target your folks, and you test it out, and you see what happens. And you get a product or service that, it could be an ebook on how to make your baseball swing better. It could be an ebook on how to, become a better Facebook advertiser. Be anything. And it could be 15 pages, 10 pages, sell it for $15, $20. Who knows? You got a business, and it costs you almost nothing. So with that infrastructure there, with the internet sitting there, with massive numbers of people, and I will admit the hardest single thing to do is gather an audience on the internet. That's very hard to do. You have to be persistent. You have to be consistent over many years, usually 2 or 3, but you'll begin to develop an audience because that's what they want, that consistency. And once you do, you've got a pipeline, and it's direct. So, I've created a couple of companies in the last few years that are like that. They're completely virtual. I run them off my phone, and 10 minutes a day, and they're operating. They're selling products every day. And everything is basically automated except customer service.
It just makes me feel even more confident that I feel like I'm thinking in the right way hearing you say this. So a good friend of mine, fellow Marine, Donnie Bovine, has a podcast called Success Champions. And I was on his podcast earlier this week on an episode, but he and I were talking the other day, and and it was funny. I told him, I said, I really think that this is the day and age of the entrepreneur because of having access to things, but the ease of access, like you're talking about, and there is so much turbulence that there's so many ideas of how do we get past that turbulence. And when I say turbulence, I don't mean necessarily what's going on in the elections or anything else like that. It's just, just that tensity of we're ready to evolve to that next level, and now it's that. Hey, go forth. Like hearing the number of 50% of businesses are 1099s is individuals is that. And then I hear, and this is not meant to be political or anything, but I hear that. And then I've been following the headlines on California want to take Uber drivers and make them employees. So And when I heard that, and of course anybody could say whatever they want about California, how California does things. But when I heard that, I was like, I don't really think this is to me, it was less of this is what you should do for the people that work for you. And it was more of almost like this necessity to hold on to the way things were always done in the past, right? Like that fear of letting something become a little bit different. And that's the thing is when fear jumps in, people dig their heels in, right? Because they just don't want it. They don't want it to change. They don't want it to let it go. They don't want to, and that's what I got out of watching what's going on out there. And I was sitting thinking, man, you're at to me, if you have the fear of holding on, then what you do is you run the risk of losing your constituents who move to other states that aren't going to deal with this, right?
Yeah, this is a huge problem. In the novel Dune, science fiction novel, there's a great line, and it's fear is the mind killer. And that is absolutely correct. When people are afraid, they can't think, and they don't think. And that's when you get into trouble with people wanting solutions or listening to things, conspiracy theories or whatever, because they're afraid and they want to grasp onto any flotsam that comes along to keep them afloat. And this is a huge issue because as long as people are afraid, you have terrible time transforming companies. Anytime they hear change in a company, they get afraid. That means my job's going away or my job's changing and I may not be able to do it anymore. And so they resist. And I tend to think of entrepreneurs now as, because it's such a loaded word in our society anymore, I tend to think of entrepreneurs, and entrepreneurs are not just people who start companies. They're people who work inside big corporations who are innovative and creative and want to help that company become what it needs to be. I mean, 5 of the companies I've started were inside major corporations, and that's a different skill set, but it's an important one. And boy, do companies need that more than ever now. So you have this fear of change, and so change management, creating change, is wonderful. And entrepreneurs do that a lot, but they have to manage that change, and they have to help other people manage that change as it moves along. So change makers and change managers are really more of what I believe entrepreneurs are doing. And to your question about California dealing with 1099s versus full-time employees, I think that tension is going to create a third category. I think we're going to find something between 1099 and W-2 that is a combination of the two things that allows a company like Uber to treat people a little bit like a 1099er, but also be able to give them more direction in their jobs like a W-2. And the problem that Uber and Lyft ran into in California was they were directing people minutely in how to do their jobs. And they couldn't do their jobs without the software and all the other tools that the company allowed them to have. And that's the definition of, when you're directing that much, that's the definition of an employee. So California was trying to enforce the law to protect workers, but they're creating another problem in doing that, which is why I believe that we'll find this third kind of worker will be developed over time to meet the gig economy needs.
Man, that is fascinating, and it just seems really appropriate for this time and age. Going back to that storm before the calm, is there's so much change going on of what does it look like. Like my daughter, she entered college, and as much as her grandparents are all over, like, what are you going to major in? What are you going to do? And people ask her, they're like, what do you think? And I'm like, I wanted her to get the college experience. And because I didn't, I grew up in a rural area. I mean, college was not something my parents were going to be able to write a check for. And dropping out naturally did not help the situation any. But when I did eventually go to college, and I went to the junior college and then got to TCU for my undergrad, I was there as a different student. I still talk to my professors from my undergrad.
Of course.
That were like, man, actually it was because TCU being a very traditional school, most of the students are, coming in at 18, leaving at 22, 23. And the professor saying, man, it was just really refreshing having you in there because they want to shape the minds, but it's not that they wanted to be challenged just because somebody thought, well, this is the way I feel about it. It was, well, when I was in China in 1996 during the Taiwan Straits crisis, this was the environment. And of course, my foreign policy professors were just like, oh, this is great, right? So I wanted my daughter to go to college to go, look, I want you to go there to learn how to learn, right? Learn how to learn. That's really what I took away from my professors back then. And I hope that doesn't change, because here it was, I was 6 weeks from graduating, and I was watching this film for one of my classes. And it was an extra credit thing. And I watched a film, and I was like, anybody could watch this film and get the premise of it. But unless you had a formal education, you most likely would not have understand a lot of things that were going on. And then I was terrified. I was like, oh my God, I'm getting ready to graduate and I don't know anything. And I called a very good friend of mine, a professor at TCU, and she goes, nope, you're ready to graduate. And I was like, what? But I don't know anything. She said, no, you're look, you open up that aperture to see that there's so much more out there, and there's supporting data for and against and something totally different. And that's why the library, when you brought that up, is I spent so much time in the library because I was fascinated. Just like when you go down in the basement, right? Yeah. And it's just nobody down there. So it wasn't just quiet, but just rows and rows of books that there's no way humanly possible that I could read all these books in a lifetime. And so, but I thought about that when my daughter was going to college. I was like, I want her to capture that, but I want her to enjoy the experience of college because she is younger and it's going to be different, but learn how to learn. And then COVID happens where her generation that was currently in college during this, or they don't know what to think yet, right? Is, hey, I went there expecting this, and then it got disrupted, and now we're doing a hybrid, and we still don't know what college is going to look like in years to come. But she's concerned. She's like, man, I just don't know. And I said, look, honey, the world is changing. Every year that goes by, the world's changing faster and faster and faster. And this was the way of the world saying, you're going to have to make a choice. Learn to adapt to things changing rapidly, or try to hold on to it not, but you don't get to control that. No. And so now even more so when she says, I don't know what I want to do, I just try to reassure her and say, it is okay. I didn't know what I was going to do. When I went in the Marines, I thought I was going to be a Marine the rest of my life. Well, and then when I learned what's a Marine, always a Marine, I was like, I didn't have to re-enlist to be a Marine the rest of my life. And then when I went into the police department, and then when I went to do TCU's executive MBA program, it wasn't on the intention of leaving the department. It was to elevate me within the department. But then I was like, whoa, wait a minute. I really want to be out in the business world of things. And so I told her, I said, where you are in 5, 10, 15, 20, even 30 years from now could be inherently different than what you would have ever thought or projected.
I want to make two comments about that. The first is the college experience is definitely going to change. And what students will be willing to pay for that will be interesting to see. But higher education is definitely being disrupted, not just by COVID, but by other technological advances. And the best thing that you can learn, the reason to go to a university now is to learn how to think critically, to learn how to adapt, and to find your network, and to connect with every single person you possibly can while you're there. Now, one of the things that COVID is doing is forcing us online. And what's really interesting is this is actually going to prepare them better for their workplace in the near future, because when they go to work, they're going to put on a headset, whether they're at home or in an office, and they're going to meet their team inside that virtual reality. And they will have built a world. It could be Hawaii where they're meeting. It could be a business room. It could be somewhere, in Europe, the Coliseum, and everyone meets. Their productivity numbers are going to be up here in the right-hand corner, just like a video game. Their stats against other parts of the company are going to be over here, and how well they're performing compared to everybody else. They're going to be all over the world, all over the state, all over the county, whatever, but they're going to be meeting in that space. and then they'll take off their headsets after they've done that part of work, and they'll do the rest of their work. So they're learning how to lead remotely now, and learning how to work a team remotely. And those are going to be skill sets they are absolutely going to have. So while it's inconvenient, it's also training them to learn, how do I lead in this environment? How do I create a team and authenticity and trust in this environment? How do I relate to my employees in this environment so we trust one another? These are all things that we should be taking advantage of right now as professors to make sure they understand that this isn't just an inconvenience. This is something they're going to be doing for the rest of their lives, and it's going to change rapidly. The technology is going to catch up. And one last thing I want to say. I want to give you an example of the kind of technological advances we're moving towards really fast that we are not prepared to think about or make policy around. So Ray Kurzweil is the chief scientist at Google. He's a brilliant man. He's done amazing things in his career. He is predicting that by 2035, which I think is a little early, maybe 2050, but he says by 2025, we will have nanites in the top third of our cerebral cortex that will connect us to the cloud. Now, what that means is that we'll go to work, we'll snap in, and we'll be connected to the cloud. And that will mean our memory is huge. That'll mean our ability to compute will be enormous. We'll be able to do things no human being has ever done because we will be connected to the universe of the internet. And then we're going to turn that off and go home. Everyone's thinking, wow, wouldn't that be awesome? But they're not thinking about, what if you get hacked? What does that mean? What if when you turn it off, you've been a god all day and suddenly you're just a normal human being with a normal brain? That's going to cause all kinds of unintended consequences, and we're not prepared to even discuss it because we don't even understand what he's talking about in the first place, what that really means. And we're going to have more and more and more of those kinds of disruptions that are going to provide enormous advances, but also create a lot of underlying unintended consequences. And we don't have a clue what all those things are. And one of the things he says, and I'll leave you with this because this always fascinated me. It gave me chills. He says, I'm always asked, we're going to have humanoid robots, right? And we always see that in science fiction, robots walking around being our butler and all that sort of thing. And he said, no, you misunderstand. We are the humanoid robots. We're the robots that we're going to be a combination of biomechanical systems before very long in order just to do our work and survive on a day-to-day basis. And that, I think, is one of the most chilling observations and predictions I've ever heard.
Man, and that just, because that can open up so many doors to Pandora's box, right?
Exactly.
I mean,
exactly.
Looking back over centuries, religion has been, it's seen disruption after disruption after disruption from, the going all the way back to Martin Luther, right? It was like, hey, I just want to write the Bible where everybody else can read it. And then King Henry, who was like, hey, wait a minute, Catholic Church's not going to give me a divorce, so I'll just start the Church of England, right? And then, which is basically almost the same thing, but gave him and then so forth coming on of what kind of friction will be there of like you're saying is people plugging in to play God and then unplugging to go, hey, God, I'm back,
Yeah, right. Exactly.
Yeah. And then what kind of other future disruptions that will cause. And then a note I wrote while hearing you talk about all of this is policy, what will the policy be? And are they willing to deal with the policy of this is, what about taxes, right? So, right now, Colorado is I spend more than 50% of my time here in Texas, and I file my taxes through Texas. But some states are going, wait a minute, you're working in our state now? You're going to pay taxes. You're going to pay state income tax here, right?
Absolutely.
Because you're working here. What does that do for, the federal government down to the state, down to the county, down to the city? To go, how do we collect if somebody's working here?
Exactly.
And then, or the nomad, right? I work from a different city every single week because I have that. I can go with my phone, and as long as it's got internet, I can go be wherever, right?
That's exactly right. And that's why we have to really begin to combine, as Friedman says, technocrats with common sense, or we're not ever going to figure it out. If all we do is come up with rules and regulations, we won't be able to handle any of the cases over time. You have to have a little bit of intent, as he put it, about how we're going to do this. And we're going to make it easier for people. And technology should make it easy, not harder, for people to interface with their government, whether it's over their taxes or it's over their Social Security or it's over opening a business. We should be already, with the technology we have, people should be able to set up a business in minutes and not have to wait for the Secretary of State, not have to wait for all of these things that are happening around them and the bureaucracy. We can definitely do away with that. There's a fantastic company called Haier, H-A-I-E-R. It's a Chinese company. It's now the largest appliance maker in the world and has been for 5 years. And they are the most entrepreneurial company I have ever seen. They have a policy called zero distance. And they have 200 mini businesses, micro businesses, that interface directly with customers. They make products like air conditioners, refrigerators, and each one of those units is an entrepreneurial unit. And they interface directly with the customers. They listen to the customers. They create prototypes that the customers use, and then they create these appliances around that. And those 200 units have the ability to change leaders. They have the ability to get finances to invest in new products themselves, so they make more money for themselves. And the company, I think they bought GE Appliance a few years ago, and they were experiencing the worst year in their history. And in 8 months, they turned it around to be the best year in their history.
Wow.
This is a phenomenal. Now, not every company can do this. It took 10 years to transform this company into this kind of entrepreneurial space. And this is resonated with me because of the intent comment that Friedman made. Zhang Ruiman, I believe, is the name of the chairman of the company. It took him 10 years to make this happen. He's been working on this company since 1984. And he allows the employees to make the decisions. He believes the less decisions coming from above, the better they should be making, because they are interfacing with the customer, and it's worked. Their margins and their profit is way beyond any other appliance company in the world. This could be applied to education. This could be applied to almost any company, but we don't have the patience for it in America. We don't have the patience to transform. Even though GE did it, it was hard. So, an example would be every college at the university at TCU could become a unit that is directly connected to students and their parents and to their potential employers, creating exactly what was needed to make those students successful in the future, and getting instant feedback from everybody who's concerned. And the university's job is not to get you a job. It's not a trade school. It's to help you not only get a job, but to keep it and grow it over time. That's the real value of a university education versus a trade school. Essentially, a trade school will get you a job, but you may not be able to evolve enough to keep that job over time.
Or that job may not exist. May not exist, right? Like, I love the being able to adapt, right? And of course, at 17, when I enlisted in the Marines, the improvise, overcome, adapt was built into us, right? I mean, that's the reason Marine Corps is very agile, right? I mean, we have all of our resources to be able to adapt to whatever situation would come up in front of us, even more so now. When I hear people go, well, this generation, I'm like, I'm more fascinated by this generation than my generation, right? My generation was the .com folks, right? And then, which if we went back 20 years ago to where we are now, it just how much it's changed to where even for this podcast on Winning Strategies Playbook, when people want to know more about the listener or download or watch or whatever, is to go to the landing page, myexperiencerealtor.com. And each week on my social media website guide to go, we need to make it simpler, make it quicker, make it smoother. To where I literally want it to be because the attention span of somebody being going to a landing page now is like, what, 3 to 10 seconds.
If that.
If that, right? They've clicked in long enough to go, all right, never mind. Like the complicated websites with all the, I'm so ADD like a squirrel on methamphetamines. Like I get lost just trying to find the damn thing. Where I told him where we were having a drop down arrow thing. And I said, we need to make this smoother. And he goes, and he sent me a text earlier this week and he goes, man, I even put like this big bold thing of like, click the arrow. And I said, people aren't even reading that, right? They're not even reading that. I was like, we need to come up with a solution where it's literally, they land on the page. Okay. Hey, if I want to buy and sell real estate, all I got to do is fill out name, phone number, email, where I'm looking at, right? Easy. But more so I came to here where it's like, okay, I click on podcasts and then it comes down to, this is the episode I want to listen to and gets all the information. If they can't get there within 3 to 10 seconds of getting to that, you've lost the consumer because of like what you're talking about, the day and age of, so we had to turn in my wife's lease vehicle this week. And so we ordered another vehicle, but it's not here yet. And so she needed to go use my truck for something yesterday. But we just got back into town Sunday and we've been on the ground running since we got there. And I was like, man, I didn't have anything to eat. So I went on Grubhub and ordered, some crap food, but I was at that point just hungry, just send me whatever. But we've become that instant gratification society that's the consumer, and looking at buyers' behaviors, real estate. I mean, in your generation, your parents bought a house and they died in the house. And
pretty much.
Where now when especially a first-time home buyer, we're like, hey, this is what the data looks like. And this is where the house is going to look like in 4 to 5 years. And they're like, why do I care 4 to 5 years from now? And to be like, if you're still in this house in 4 to 5 years, you're probably going to call me at year 2 or 3, because that's the trends, people's behaviors of what they want in a house now. And especially during the pandemic, right? I mean, buyer behaviors are all over the board.
I bet.
Where the builders are like, well, what should we build? And I said, man, I don't even want to tell you what to build right now, because what the consumer is going to want, they still don't know. There's still so much disruption that till we get past that turbulence of knowing where they're going to end up at. Now, the key to the sauce would be is if you knew 12 months out before the consumer did, and then you started building, and then it would I would be
Well, true just about anything if you knew 12 months in advance.
Yeah, that's a very, very fair statement. Well, I like to end every one of these interviews with, and I know that there's a million answers that you could give, but if there was that one thing you could go back to 22-year-old self and say, if nothing else, either do or don't do this. What is that one thing? If you're like, man, please just do this one thing. What would you tell 22-year-old self?
To not be afraid. It's going to be okay no matter what you decide to do. Because I think young people, that's when you should try, because you have plenty of time to recover. Starting a company at my age is a bigger risk by far than somebody starting one at 22. But yeah, I would definitely go back and sit down with myself and say, look, it's going to be okay, man. No matter what happens, no matter what you do, you're going to find a way through it. You're going to be okay, because that's the thing we don't know. And I think knowing that, I would have done the same things. I just would have been able to do them better. That's a great answer. And what's funny is many of these we've recorded, not one answer has been the same so far. Yeah. And which only demonstrates to the audience that that's true candor coming from the guest, because anybody could give a cliche answer of whichever. So you're still owning companies. Yep. You're a professor at TCU. Are you teaching the executive MBA class yet? Mm-hmm. Okay. I'm just teaching MBAs and undergrads right now. MBAs and undergrads. Mm-hmm. And you mentioned library before is the only answer you got. And actually, before we started this, you said that's something you're very passionate about. Public libraries, absolutely, yeah. So why is that? Well, public libraries are, they serve a portion of the population that is totally unseen by most people. Now, 62% of adults have a library card. Their libraries are enormously popular. They have more visitors each year in libraries than all of the professional sports in America have at their stadiums in a year when we can go by a factor of 10.
Wow.
I mean, it is, libraries are very popular, but they hold a unique place. Public libraries hold a unique place in our democracy because they are the one place where every idea is free for anyone to look at. Every single idea that's ever been out there, they are free to go in and take a look at it at the library, and it's free. The other thing they do is a lot of people don't realize that 34% of Americans don't have access to computers or high-speed access of any kind, and the only place they can get that is at the library. So in Fort Worth, actually, it's 37%. That's a disenfranchisement of people who cannot partake in the conversation of the internet and all the things that it offers, and getting jobs and attaching to social services and being able to find an education, et cetera. The library provides all of that. They go way, way beyond lending books. That's sort of the baseline of what they do. But they offer healthcare services. They offer entrepreneurial services. They offer every kind of assistance you can imagine for teenagers to learn how to code, for grade school kids to get a meal. I mean, it is phenomenal what public libraries are doing all across the United States. In fact, I just started a company called adlibra.com that is a bookstore, an online bookstore that is built to support public libraries. We'll be giving a large percentage of our revenue to the Urban Libraries Council, which is the only organization of libraries that is for libraries, not librarians. So the American Library Association is for librarians. The Public Library Council is for librarians, but ULC, of which, and for transparency, I was the chairman of for a couple of years and was on the board for about 9, is the only one for libraries. So we're gonna give them the money, and then they're going to distribute it to libraries around the country.
That is definitely something I didn't realize, but I hear that and I get excited because you would think of a public library being an antiquated source, but it's actually learned to evolve and to develop to stay relevant along the way.
Libraries are more entrepreneurial than people would believe.
Wow.
For a city organization or a county organization, they evolve to meet their patrons' needs. And they evolve more rapidly than almost any other institution I've ever seen in the United States. They are fascinating. Libraries are absolutely fascinating.
So with our listeners, as we're wrapping up, what are a couple of other websites that would be, especially for the entrepreneur out there, would you say are good ones? I know that you had mentioned one called the 19th.
The 19th. Well, the 19th is a site that was started by the former managing editor, executive editor of the TexasTribune.org, Emily Ramshaw, and some other people from the Tribune. And it has exploded in popularity. It's all about women and women's role in government and in society and in the economy and every other way. And it's just fantastic. TexasTribune.org is a website that is nonpartisan, nonprofit, that was established by Ross Ramsey, who's a great political reporter, Evan Smith, who was the editor at Texas Monthly for many, many years, and John Thornton, who was a venture capitalist. I was one of the first people, I was on their board early, and I was the first publisher of the Tribune. And it is a phenomenal website on Texas policy and politics. And every year they have the Texas Tribune Idea Festival, and they bring in the heaviest of heavy hitters in politics and policy from around the country and now from around the world to talk about politics in Texas and policy in Texas. And right now, the Tribune has more reporters covering the State House than all of the daily newspapers in Texas combined. And the reason that the three of them wanted to do this is because a lot of money is spent in state houses, and there was no transparency into that. And so the Tribune was started to help Texans understand public policy and politics and to understand where their money's going and how it's being spent and what impact lobbyists have and those kinds of things. It's fascinating. I highly advise you take a look. It's free to go to the website. You can become a member, but that doesn't mean the website's always going to be there. They have a deal with the Washington Post to cover the Texas House and Senate caucuses. in the Washington Post. So it is a broad and inclusive, absolutely transparent website. You can go and see how much everybody makes. You can see exactly, and in every story they say, if that person or anyone named in the story has contributed, they are named. This person has contributed to the Tribune. So everyone knows exactly. So that's how they keep their nonpartisanship in place. They're totally transparent about what they do. It's an awesome play. I am so proud to have been a part of that. I can hardly stand it.
That's fantastic. And we'll make sure that for the listeners out here that you've got links to be able to get that
Great.
whenever you
Thank
go
you.
to the website, myexperiencerealtor.com, click on podcasts, go down to Michael Sherrod, click on there. It'll give you all the information. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
This was one of the most fascinating conversations I have had since starting this thing. Thank you for your time coming. And I look forward to learning more from you down the road.
Thanks, Jeremy. I enjoyed it very much.
Absolutely. Thank you.